What scares you the most? Now, I'm not a fan of spiders, but what really scares me is wasting my time on a bunch of hours on rehashed storylines that should feel fresh and unique. Welcome to Derry is finally here. Does this HBO original series play on our fears, or is it just a huge time waster? In 1962, a couple with their son moved to Derry, Maine, just as a young boy disappears. With their arrival, very bad things begin to happen within the town. I think it's good to know going in that this series only uses Stephen King's It as the inspiration for the story. According to HBO, show creators Andy and Barbara Muschietti, along with Jason Fuchs, used the show to expand the vision that was established by Andy in his It films. So if you are a fan of those movies, chances are you'll be able to get into the storytelling rather easily. If, though, you're more a fan of the immense detail of King's novel and all of the backstory and history tangents that he touches on, this might be more of a struggle. Now, I'm going to cover the first 5 of the 8-hour-long episodes because that's all HBO sent to me. But it allowed me to get a good sense of the characters, the storytelling style, and even the trajectory. The show begins with an impressively weird arc that feels right at home in any batcrap crazy King story. And while the context isn't given for all that we see play out, we are thrust into 2 separate but eventually converging storylines. Now, one of those involves a familiar thread of just a group of kids who have had friends disappear, and then the other is a group of Air Force members who are engaging in some sort of top-secret search. Character development, it's a bit sparse at the beginning of the show, but through some small bits of natural exposition, we get a decent feel of who or what the players are. Now, the atmosphere of the small town, it continues to capitalize on the darkness that generations have endured, just thanks to the evil entity that arrived. But now, knowing the story that's already been shown to us in the movie and the miniseries, there's not much mystery about what it is. Thankfully, though, the series does aim to inform on many of those details that neither of the previous works delved into. There's an overarching aura of anger within Derry, and while the show hasn't yet to fully exploit it in the first handful of episodes, there is still a building dread that threatens to come to an explosive end. The creepy adventure fun that the kids' storyline follows feels very much like the films, with similar characters and almost identical missions. What we watch them experience is gross, messed up in an awesome way, creating some visceral and stomach-churning imagery that involves a lot of creativity in both design and execution. And the threats they face share some sort of design characteristic, which then reinforces the continuity of the monster, but each creature we watch, intimidate, or even assault, they are applause-worthy just because of the nightmare-feel qualities. And even though not all of the effects had been finalized in my screeners, the graphics looked menacing and grotesque, sometimes making me squirm a bit, and then other times just creating a bit of that in my throat. And because the targets of many of these attacks are kids, there's that unspoken level of discomfort because children and animals being harmed, that creates the most sympathetic response in us, typically, or maybe it should. But these are typically the innocents, and I think that's why King chose kids as the target for this book. The most vulnerable amongst us, along with a strong tendency by adults to dismiss wild claims just due to active imaginations, that then create the circumstances for a perfect victim. Now, the actors who portray the kids, they did a great job of showing inquisitiveness and determination, but then abject fear in the face of the vicious unknown. Now, I don't like all of the characters all of the time, but there are some who are instantly endearing, just thanks to charming demeanors and then also some very good line deliveries. And then on the adult side of things, I love how the story uses them to create the fear and unease that comes through helplessness to save a child or a friend. The adults we come into contact with are a range of likable and despicable. Now, a surprise for me was the inclusion of a well-known King character, as somebody who is called upon to use their gifts for the military's purpose. Chris Chalk does a phenomenal job at crafting his character to be respectfully fearful of his gift, while also showcasing the reluctance to use it and then the toll it takes for using that gift. And while the first few episodes took me a bit to get entrenched in from just the character point of view, especially of the adults, several of them did begin to grow on me and then build out people that I was invested in. There are some wonky things within this show, though, that just kept this from being wholly awesome. Now, one is the choppiness of the story. We're thrust into situations that are visually outstanding, even tense, but they lack some needed context. More so just coming about abruptly and then not being addressed again. And I'm not sure I'm totally buying the military arc. I mean, not that it doesn't make sense or even seem plausible within the story, but having the knowledge of the films, which partially take place well after Welcome to Derry's era, the plot seems futile, even a time waster with no room for lore expansion on this front. We already know whether or not they're going to succeed in their mission. So is this just a time filler? I mean, we're going to know hopefully more within the final 3 episodes. There's also a character who is chosen for a specific job function because of a trait that they possess. Now, I am going to be kind of vague in this because I don't want it to spoil, but the trait is emphasized repeatedly, so it is a core portion to the character. Then in episode 5, we see actions and behaviors that completely contradict, creating a faltering perspective on whether or not the assessment was correct, and then if they'll be able to carry out their task. I mean, the only reason this even stands out as something odd to me or even wonky is because of all of the focus that was placed on this particular trait. Now, I'd mentioned that a lot of the exposition, especially when it came to character development, it was brief, but spread out and delivered in ways that felt natural. In episode 4, there is an exposition dump that's delivered through a flashback, kind of storytelling. And while I have zero issue with the exposition, even the visuals, the line delivery broke me out of all of the suspense. Now, a kid is retelling a folklore tale, and I'm willing to give the child actor just a ton of leeway simply because they're young. But the final product comes through, at least audibly, like a child telling a horror story. The cadence, the emphasis, they're strange. And then even when the speaker attempts to create some unease or outright fear, that's not the emotion that's conveyed. I think they should have chosen another way to convey this, even having the adult tell the story to the kid as a warning rather than the reverse. And strangely, at least within these first 5 episodes, there's not a lot of insight provided into Derry. I mean, yeah, we get one flashback tale that I just mentioned, but is that all we're going to receive? If it has been inhabiting the area for millennia, there's so much that could be explored. And yet we're mainly stuck in a time that's familiar and extremely close to when the films play out, creating at least the assumption that Welcome to Derry isn't going to provide a whole lot of depth to the town within the title. Now, one additional qualm I'm going to talk about comes in episode 3. A good chunk of time is devoted to a sequence that becomes comical when it should have been freaky. And I'm not opposed to a little of the levity that is shared between the characters. It works to illustrate their unease in this tense situation, and then how they attempt to make light of things so as not to die of fright. But as the scene progresses, it gets more and more silly, removing what could have been suspenseful panic and instead just creating something that's laughably slapstick. I appreciated the comedy of errors that were included, but they broke the atmosphere completely and then changed the scene, and thus the episode from something unnerving or dark to just something ridiculous. But despite these shortcomings within the storytelling, there's a decent horror building within the narrative. From the known threats that come from it to then the mysterious searches that the military is undertaking. And then, combined with inherent racism and bigotry that was prevalent at the time, the entire atmosphere, it's just one of dreadful discomfort. And while I wasn't fully engaged with the character progressions early on, the development and the time spent with them, they built endearing connections so that I am now invested in their well-being, and I am cautiously awaiting what their fate's going to be. The military storyline continues to be a questionable choice just thanks to what we know transpires within the films, but happily, the imagery for the series so far is grotesque and terrible, melding previous characteristics of it with newly imagined horrors that can make you pull up your legs onto the couch so nothing can grab at your feet. I'm not sure we really needed this series, but I am enjoying the show from a casual perspective. I don't think it's achieved the needed level of horror or distress as it could, and the lore so far, it just hasn't been expanded on in remarkable ways. But the series does create some fun, if not unmemorable, episodes. There's no sex or nudity, a lot of profanity, and then a bunch of gruesome violence. So far, for episodes 1 through 5, I'd give it, Welcome to Derry, 3 out of 5 couches. I'm much more intrigued by original creative works, just bringing us something completely new rather than expansion of existing lore. All right, so what do you have on your binge list right now? Anything just outstanding that you could recommend to me? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.